All right, take
Cut.
2.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm Scott Colburn, and I am the sound designer on Colony. And I met Kevin through Andrew McAllister, who edited Zombies of Mass Destruction, and went into a meeting and met him that way, and became the sound. And we worked on the sound design together for Zombies, and then he said, "I'm doing another picture. I'm doing a short in the science fiction," and I said, "Yes," and I want to be a part of that. So.
Why were you so excited to do a science fiction film?
Well, I'm a real big fan of 50s science fiction films, the B films, and other like psychotronic films. And Kevin and I had talked about kind of our love of different oddball films that were kind of in the science fiction genre, but also our love of David Lynch and that sort of thing. And so I feel that he knows how important sound is to a film. I think even on my demo reel it says, I think it was maybe Lucas that said it was 50% of picture. And so we have an affinity for making the film sound, the sounds on the film be really good and be complex and kind of add to the emotion of the film. Well, the thing that we liked the most about David Lynch's films is that how sound has a really big impact, or the environments that he creates has a big impact on the emotion of a scene. And so for this particular picture, for Colony, my job was to create the planet, the world that the characters are in. So it's heavy on the ambience. And because nobody's ever been there, you could really make up anything that you wanted. But Kevin also mentioned to me the film Sunshine, and I saw that on a plane coming back from Paris, and it was a different experience because it was the roar of the jet in addition to watching the film on like really crappy headphones, and it was like the greatest noise concert I'd ever been to in my life. And so when he mentioned that film, I knew it was Lynch with Sunshine, but I was also channeling how weird the soundtracks and the sound designs are on 50 science fiction films as well. So I put all that together to try to create something kind of exciting, hopefully exciting. It was interesting to sound design a film without actually seeing some of the imagery because it was computer generated, and that's just at the point where I'm at right now in production. I'll fill in the holes later, but I just sort of like imagine what I think it's supposed to look like and asking questions. And I saw some still shots of what the planet might look like after color correction and some hoo-ha magic wizardry things on it. And it wasn't so much a challenge as it was taking each element and trying to make each element work on its own. So editing the dialogue and working with the kind of buzz and hum that was behind the dialogue and making sure that that was smooth, then adding in the ambience of it, muting the dialogue track and making sure the ambience worked for each scene, and then adding in all the Foley, all the movement sounds, and listening to just that and making sure that the film was still a complete picture for each element, and then mixing those elements together, and then at the very end bringing the music in and popping that in and making it all work sonically was actually the biggest challenge, because I would say that at any given time there's all those elements that are probably taking up 10 to 15 tracks each. So there's a lot of sound going on, even though a lot of the elements are very subtle, especially like in the Foley department, but they add to the picture. Mm-hmm. In creating the sound of the aliens was interesting. It was actually accidental, in that I was searching for another sound on a sound effects CD, and at the top of the CD was the sound of these lions, and I was like, wow, that sounds really strange. Maybe that might be good for when the aliens are revealed. And so I just took the track and popped it in there, and at first I went a little overboard. It was like they were growling all the time and started hacking it down and hacking it down and hacking it down, and then stretching it and pitching it and making it sound less and less like lions. And it added, and because the scene is in soft focus, it's kind of surreal, and so it sort of starts to make sense. But I was also thinking that ultimately we find out that these are not aliens at all. And I thought that maybe the masks and the costumes that they were wearing for whatever reason, or the suits, or for whatever reason they're wearing these outfits, that also contributed to like the weird breathing sounds or grunting sounds that you hear, because they're not able to breathe well, or the costume impairs their dialogue somehow. I thought that was pretty fun. In the pod scenes specifically, Kevin and I didn't really speak about this, but for some reason I went for sounds that were familiar yet could be frightening to some people, and also worked like that the pods were sort of chintzy, like that they didn't have the best manufacturing for them. So I went with like kind of the thing's gonna almost fall apart. Oh, can you get that for me? There was a part, I used actual airplane sounds, which can give some people some real problems and real fright if they're afraid of flying. But just the wind-up of a jet engine is usually indicative of people just like they start to get a little tense. But even just trying to make the pod sound like it's going to rip apart, I actually just used this file cabinet behind me to... And it's not going to sound much like, you know, on the actual the shot here and the sound here, but when you have a microphone close to it and EQ it right, then it really sounds like the thing's about ready to blow up.
It's cool. What's this?
This is actually the planet here, and so there's 3 environments. These are kind of mixed together now, but it was dirt, just dirt here, and then rocks here, and then debris here. And so in doing, I can show you a segment with the aliens in it where they're walking on this, and so it's just doing this sort of thing. Or a combination. Yeah, and it's also that even though they're human in size, I thought it would be strange if they were really light on their feet. So they kind of move like that instead of like that. And again, it's like the sound that you're hearing now is nothing like the sound in the film, because the microphone's a lot closer, and then it can be EQ'd to make it fuller or sound less like rocks in a box. And so it's, I mean, that's interesting in its own sense, but then there's also ambience that happens in the same scene, which is just this. And so that's the sound of the planet at this particular point in the film. The ambience changes in the planet as things get more intense. And then there's also a sound effects track. Which isn't that exciting by itself. But that gives us a whole composite of this particular scene. So the addition of all those elements just compiled together gives a really surreal nature to that particular scene. The other half of my life I produce music records, and the reason I was able to kind of cross over into doing film is because I approach music mixing in a cinematic way. And I usually either talk to the band about what image they have in their head, or if they don't have an image, I say, well, the image that I have is this, and we talk about what the scene is that the music's supposed to support. And so we mix the music for that picture, which doesn't exist. So crossing over into film, where I actually get to mix for the actual picture, it was easy to do. Because now I actually have the picture to mix for, and actually in a way it's harder because now the picture's actually there and I can't fudge it. I have to like really do what's there on the screen. Where in music it's not there and it's completely open and I can do whatever I want. So the two parts of my life kind of like go back and forth between the two. I approach it all the same way. I heard the temp music and then some of the music that was done as demos, and it affected what I was doing a little bit because I just kind of needed to know what the score was going to be like so that I wasn't stepping on it sonically. But really I did kind of take each element on its own so that it can exist on its own by itself. And so in the end I just have 4 or 5 elements that I'm mixing together rather than 80 elements. So it did affect it because I needed to know where the holes were for the different sound effects, and I ended up EQing some of the music too to like work in to fill in some low end that wasn't there in the sound effects or vice versa. It was like mixing it all together. The working with Kevin is really great because in the mix process he allows me to do my work, and I present him with what I would call a balanced, complete, mix, but we make the decisions together about certain sounds that come up and down and like how the music swells and different edits and some sound effects that he might have thought about that were in his head but aren't necessarily in the script or that I didn't know were going to be there. And we work really well together because it's almost nonverbal in a way that we're just kind of going and he'll say, the music here, and I would like move it. He's like, exactly. And so that was really kind of cool that we work together and our brains are working in the same direction, even if it's darting around. And there's very little times that we're going on, what are you talking about? Because we're kind of always thinking the same thing at the same time. And that's really valuable. And, in music and film, it's like if the director and the sound designer aren't on the same page, then you're just like this all the time and it doesn't make any sense. We work really well together and we work really fast together. And that's really awesome. And that's it's kind of rare. It's like I don't think I've had an experience quite like it before. I had a meeting with some people that were actually involved in the space program. And I wanted to interview them because I wanted to ask them what it sounded like. And the responses that I got were really inspirational to like how I sound designed the film. They would hear what the cosmonauts would hear in their spaceship, but they would hear it through this little speaker. And so it was even more surreal to them because it was strange, tiny sounding, but they could hear like this oscillation and sort of wind sounds and like kind of this kind of strange din coming through this little speaker. And they could only imagine what it was like on the other side. So in this film, I created an ambience for what I called mission control, and then another ambience for the pods. And when you flip through the scenes, the ambience changes, and whatever ambience is not there, meaning like if you're looking at mission control, you're hearing the ambience of the pod through a little speaker. And then when it flips, it goes the other way. And also the dialogue changes like that too, so you hear it like it's over a telephone, or if you actually see them, you hear it full spectrum. And so that was like a really key point. And I cut it really hard, like it cuts with the scenes, and it's sort of like doing noise records or avant-garde music records because you can do these hard cuts and it's kind of interesting, and you wouldn't think that it would work with film, but it really worked in this one where it's just like it totally changes and it's a hard cut, but usually you're not supposed to do that in sound design, but it really works for this film.
Cool. Anything else?
It's pretty good.
I think that's about it.
Yeah.